This video is going to be a little bit different from our normal content. Not so much about travel, but a lot of people have asked us just how we got to be canal boat owners. And just a disclaimer before we start. We're pretty new to this ourselves and we're still learning. So by no means should this be taken as the definitive how-to on how to go about finding and purchasing a boat in Europe. This is just what worked for us and this is our story. So, welcome aboard. I'll try to avoid a long-winded backstory here, but this whole adventure really started for us way back in 2019 with a chance encounter. But I'll get back to that in a minute. We visited Europe a number of times, and France in particular just showed us a better way to live. Life just seemed to move at a more humane pace. In 2021, I was facing burnout, having spent the last 3 decades with 11-hour workdays and a combined commute time of over 3 hours. And that was on good days. I was done. I was finished. I'd had enough. So I decided to take retirement just a little bit early. But being somewhat ADHD, I have a hard time sitting still. So what exactly would retirement look like? We knew it had to involve travel. We loved Europe. So plan A was to look for a small town home or apartment somewhere in rural France, somewhere to call our home base while we traveled throughout Europe. Once we started looking seriously, we found that to find the right place at the right price, in a town of medium size with enough infrastructure, with amenities like restaurants, entertainment, public transport, with easy access to rail and an airport, the prices started to climb dramatically. Added to that, we'd be paying property taxes, we'd have to pay to heat and cool the place, and if we really wanted to be mobile, we'd have to think about the possibility of buying or leasing a car. Costs were starting to add up, and this is getting to be a little bit more expensive than we'd first thought. So maybe we ought to think about a plan B. Remember that chance encounter I'd mentioned? Well, on one of our previous trips to France, we were walking through the town of Béziers, on one of those crazy hot 40-degree days that you can sometimes get. So we thought we might be able to escape the heat a little bit by walking along the canal. Well, it wasn't any cooler, but as we were walking along and admiring some of the boats tied up, there was an older couple sitting on the aft deck of their boat in the shade. I think they saw us and took a little bit of pity on us, and waved us over to their boat, where they offered us a couple of ice-cold Coca-Colas, which we gratefully accepted. In conversation, we learned they were from Ireland. They'd been living on board and exploring Europe for the past 5 years. And we thought, what a brilliant idea. And I said as much on a Facebook post later that day. We didn't know it at the time, but that chance meeting would play a major role in the shape of our lives in the next few years. So getting back to plan B, I said to Laura, what if instead of an apartment or a townhome, we bought a boat? And then I held my breath for the inevitable no. But much to my surprise, she was even more enthusiastic about the idea than I was. It's funny, things don't usually work out that way in our household. So if this was to be a possibility, we now had some real homework in front of us. What kind of boat? How big? Where would we keep it? What was our budget? And could we even really do something like this? Having both grown up in boating families, as well as having several vessels of our own over the years, we had a pretty good idea of what we liked and didn't like. And for what it's worth, if you're thinking about this kind of thing for yourself, don't let a lack of boating experience hold you back. With the proper training, this can be done by just about anybody. So in spite of having years and years of experience on the west coast of Canada with boats, the canal boats were a little bit different for us. Well, they're a lot different actually. There's a huge variety of canal-capable boats to choose from in Europe. Everything from fiberglass cruisers to converted Dutch steel barges, every shape, size, and budget you can imagine. Laura was leaning more towards a conventional cruiser, whereas I had my heart set on something with a little more history, like a Dutch canal barge. It was pretty clear we'd have to look at as many different types of boats as possible, just to see what felt right, and to convince her to see things my way. Seriously though, we did look at a few cruisers which would have been ideal, except they didn't quite meet all of our criteria. The first couple of boats we looked at, we actually fell in love with. They were a couple of 12-meter super Lauersmeers. They would have been pretty near perfect were it not for the fact they weren't fitted with showers. And since we'd be living on board, we had a pretty strict list of criteria that had to be met, and a real stand-up shower was at the top of the list. We'd taken the time to write up a pretty strict list of must-haves and wants. The must-haves were must-haves. The wants were negotiable. Some of the necessities were a galley and fridge, of course, some sort of heat system, solar power when we're off the grid, and a bow thruster. We definitely wanted a single engine boat. A single prop boat can sometimes make access to a riverbank a little bit easier, not having to worry about prop damage or hitting the rudder, not to mention the added complexity and cost of maintenance on a twin engine vessel. There were other things to consider. How much draft would the boat need? In other words, how deep in the water would she sit? How much air draft was allowable? In other words, how tall is the boat? The draft, of course, is important, especially in France, which can be sometimes challenging with water depths. Also in France, there's a lot of fixed stone bridges, which obviously can't be lifted. So your boat has to be low enough, or to be made low enough to sneak under. These were all factors we had to take into consideration if we eventually wanted to make our way to the south of France, which we do. So the search was on, but since we were still in Vancouver, all we could do was shop online. And then, of course, the world shut down with COVID, and we weren't going anywhere. I kept myself busy scouring the online advertising from a number of European boat sites. There's Yacht Focus, Vickers, Dove, and the very strangely named Apollo Duck. There's a bunch of others as well, and I'll post links at the end of this video. Because we couldn't travel, all we could do was watch from afar as a bunch of vessels we thought might be perfect disappeared from the market one by one, including one that we shortlisted, which I'll talk about in a minute. As soon as COVID restrictions were eased and travel restrictions were lifted, we headed overseas as soon as we could. We'd just come through a Canadian winter, so we started off with a little bit of sunshine in Spain. No boat or barge shopping in Spain, since Spain doesn't really have any canals. After that, we slowly made our way north through France, Belgium, and eventually the Netherlands. And from what we experienced, the Netherlands offered the best selection of fairly priced, beautifully maintained vessels. There's a pride of ownership there we haven't seen many other places, so that's where we concentrated our search. That's not to say that great vessels can't be found elsewhere. This is just what worked for us. So we'd now been in Europe almost 3 months, and our allotted time of 90 days was coming to an end, and we still hadn't found the right boat. It was then I spotted an online advert that I thought surely must be a mistake. It was a vessel I'd shortlisted last year. I confirmed that it had been sold as I contacted the broker, and he said, yeah, it was gone. And yet, here it was posted again just a little more than 12 months later. Same photos, same price, same broker. So we contacted the broker and confirmed yes, it was in fact back up for sale. It seemed the owner had bought the vessel to use as an apartment while his new condominium was being built. And seeing as construction was nearing completion, the boat was back up for sale. And so we made an appointment right away to go see the boat in a little village called Brila. And to make a long story just a little bit shorter, the crane boat turned out to be everything we could have hoped for. It wasn't perfect, but then again, what boat is? There were a couple of things that needed attention. She had a leaky bow thruster, the holding tank had to be plumbed in properly, and she needed a good cleaning and repaint of the hull. So we spent a couple of hours touring the boat and chatting over coffee with the owner, whom we really got to like. After a little more conversation, we talked about price, conditions, and we made an offer subject to inspection. Thing was, we were now at a time and had to hightail it back to Canada, so this meant any transaction would have to be completed remotely. So we wired the broker a 10% deposit. Now we had to wait an agonizing 3 weeks for the mechanical inspection and the survey, which we eventually passed. So not much to do now except wire the balance of the funds for the boat, and she'd be ours. The broker was able to handle the registration and name change for us. Since we couldn't get back from Canada anytime soon, one of the conditions of our purchase was that we'd have moorage guaranteed for at least 4 months. And as it happened, we liked Brila so much, we still call it our home port. Now that we owned a boat, there were still a few things we had to address. One of those came very close to derailing this whole adventure, namely insurance. For reasons we still don't quite understand, it's getting increasingly difficult to find insurance for overseas owners. This is particularly true for Canadians, as well as a growing number of US states. After an epic effort spanning several days of phone calls, emails, and texts, Laura finally did secure one, and only one, insurer. We have since found a couple of others to which I'll post links at the end of this video. There was another thing we had to take care of before we could legally leave the dock. Despite having spent a lifetime on the water on Canada's west coast, none of my Canadian credentials were recognized in Europe. This meant I'd have to get my ICC certification. The ICC stands for the International Certificate of Competency, and it's really just to prove you can demonstrate a basic understanding of the rules and regulations on the water. The real irony is that if you're renting a canal boat, you really don't need any of this. You can just show up at the rental agency, show them your driver's license and a credit card, and an hour later you'll be on your way. But if you own a vessel, you have to be certified. So I opted to take my training and certification through the Bishop Abbey Sailing School in the UK. I should also mention here there are differing levels of certification required, with most of those differences coming into play at vessels over 20 meters and under 20 meters. Lastly, depending on your country of registry and the size of your boat, you may be required to have a VHF operator certificate and possibly a ship's license. Both the ICC and VHF courses are offered through a variety of Royal Yachting Association accredited sailing schools, which can be found throughout Europe and the UK. And as I said before, don't let a lack of boating experience put you off any of this. It's not rocket science, and a reasonably intelligent monkey could pass most of these courses. I mean, I did. I will say, it doesn't hurt to study the appropriate handbooks. I ordered these through Amazon. The sailing schools may include these with the course. I simply wanted to familiarize myself with the content before attending the course. I'll post a link to these and the publication numbers at the end of this video. So that's it. Don't take this as any kind of authoritative how-to guide. This is just our experience. I will say there's one more resource you should really seriously consider if you're thinking about this. It's known as the DBA, or Dutch Barge Association. It's an online community of like-minded individuals that quite literally wrote the book on canal boating. There's a wealth of knowledge there, with some very experienced and patient veteran canal boat owners from all over the world that are very generous in sharing their experience. And again, I'll put a link to the DBA website at the end of this video, as well as a few other sites you might find either helpful or just plain entertaining. So in closing, thanks for watching and welcome aboard.